Today I'm going to be talking to you about values and why values are important in the context of creating an aligned culture. So one of the things that I always ask a new client when I meet them is, what are your values? And they usually can tell me what the values are. But then I ask them a question of, okay, so how do you know that the values are being lived in your organisation? And that question quite often stumps leaders. Because they actually haven't thought about how am I measuring, how am I actually seeing that these values are being lived in the organisation. So before we talk about why values are important, what I'd like to talk about is what values actually are. So if we think about values, values actually inform us in terms of our behaviour and the kind of decisions that we make. So I'm sure most of you have seen this famous iceberg in terms of understanding that what we see and what we hear is behaviour. But what's actually driving that behaviour? Two key things that drive behaviour. One is what we're thinking and feeling. And the other is our values. So values actually permeate both internally and externally and create the experience that people have of us, either both internally and externally. So now let's look at why values are so important. So when your team members, when people are really clear on why values are important and they understand what the values are, they're going to grow and develop a lot quicker. Why? Because they understand why they're doing something and it's actually aligned to where the strategy of the organisation. It helps decision making. So when we're clear on our values, we make decisions that are aligned to those values. And so again, if we think about, when we make the best decisions, they're when they are actually congruent to either our personal values or to the values of the organisation. Values are one of the contributors to an aligned culture. We know that purpose and having a commitment is obviously one piece, but having values is really critical. Because when we've got a shared set of values, they create the right behaviours to then create a really aligned culture which gets us great outcomes. And finally, it attracts and retains good talent. When people have a good experience of us, both internally and externally, people want to come and work for your organisation. So people internally know exactly what it is, that they know what the values are, how we're going to treat each other, how we're going to treat our customers, and then conversely, our customers have a great experience of us. And our customers potentially could become your employees. So 3 tips I want to share with you just to help you as a leader to make sure that the values are really being lived and embraced in your organisation and with your team. First one is to incorporate them in everyday conversations. So whenever you're giving feedback, when you're giving a piece of praise or recognition, make sure that you link that piece of feedback to one of the values. Hey, when you demonstrated X, Y, Z, that was a really good demonstration of the value of simplicity, whatever the value may be. And all of a sudden you're actually bringing the values to life. But also when you're recruiting, make sure that you talk about the values to the potential candidate. Because they'll know whether they're aligned to the organisation culturally, and you'll also know whether they're aligned just in terms of how they respond to those values when you're sharing them. Secondly is make sure that you link your performance and reward to the values. And so what that does is it shows how serious you are as an organisation, as a leader, that you're actually going to reward people if they're demonstrating and living those values. How many times have you experienced where somebody's been a really good operator but are not living the values and there's been no consequences? So make sure you're linking that. And finally, make sure that your team members understand the behaviours. So what are the behaviours that sit underneath those values so that they can demonstrate those values and are really clear around what it is that they need to be doing. And just finally, 2 questions that I'm going to leave you with to ask yourself. First question is, as a leader, am I role modelling the values? Am I demonstrating the values? Am I actually living those values? And if I'm not, then I need to start doing it. Because remember, you're the benchmark. And secondly, are my team aware of what the values are, but more importantly, do they understand why they're so important so that they can create and they can actually align their behaviours to those values? So just to summarise, remembering that an aligned culture Part of having an aligned culture is having values that are embedded and being lived by people in the organisation, because that drives the right behaviour to then drive great outcomes. Thank you for listening, and here's to your success.